Chapter 2. Quarters. It was near the end of his 5th grade year. Around 11:30 one morning during silent reading, Greg felt hungry. So he had started to think about his lunch. A ham and cheese sandwich, a bag of nacho cheese Doritos, a bunch of red grapes, and an apple cherry juice box. His mom had made him a bag lunch, which was fine with Greg. Making a lunch was a lot cheaper than buying one, and Greg loved saving money whenever possible. Plus, home food was usually better than school food. And on days he brought a bag lunch, his mom also gave him 50 cents to buy dessert, which was also fine with Greg. Sometimes he bought a treat, and sometimes he held on to the money. On this particular day, he had been planning to spend both quarters on an ice cream sandwich. Then Greg remembered where his lunch was, at home, on the kitchen counter. He did have $1 of his own money in his wallet. He had 2 quarters from his mom in his front pocket, but a whole lunch cost $2. He needed 2 more quarters. So Greg had walked to the front of the classroom, waited until his teacher looked up from her book, and then said, "Mrs. McCormick, I left my lunch at home. May I borrow 50 cents? Mrs. McCormick had not missed a teaching opportunity in over 25 years. So she shook her head, and in a voice loud enough for the whole class to hear, she said, "I'm sorry, but no, I will not lend you money. Do you know what would happen if I handed out 50 cents to all the boys and girls who forgot their lunches? I'd go broke, that's what. You need to learn to remember these things for yourself." Then turning to the class, Mrs. McCormick had announced, "Greg needs some lunch money. Can someone lend him 50 cents? Over half of the kids in the class raised a hand. Embarrassed, Greg had hurried over to Brian Lamont, and Brian handed him 2 quarters. "Thanks," Greg said. "Pay you back tomorrow." 10 minutes later, Greg was in the cafeteria line, shaking all 4 quarters around in his pocket. They made a nice clinking sound, and had reminded Greg how much he liked quarters. Stacked up 4, you've got $1. Stack up 20, and that's $5. Greg remembered one day when he had piled up all his quarters on his dresser, 4 stacks, and each had been over a foot tall. Stacking up quarters like that always made Greg feel rich. So on that day in April of his 5th grade year, Greg had started looking around the cafeteria, and everywhere he looked, he saw quarters. He saw kids trading quarters for ice cream sandwiches and cupcakes and cookies at the dessert table. He saw kids over at the school store trading quarters for neon pens and sparkly pencils, and for little decorations like rubber soccer balls and plastic butterflies to stick on the ends of those new pencils. He saw Albert Hobart drop 3 quarters into a machine so he could have a cold can of juice with his lunch. Kids were buying extra food, fancy pens and pencils, special drinks and snacks. There were quarters all over the place, buckets of them. And then Greg remembered those hands that had been raised in his classroom, all those kids who'd had a couple of quarters to lend him, extra quarters. Excited, Greg had started making some calculations in his head. Another one of his talents. There were about 450 4th, 5th, and 6th graders at Ashworth Intermediate School. If even half of those kids had 2 extra quarters to spend every day, then there had to be at least 400 quarters floating around the school. That was $100 a day, over $500 each week. Money, extra money, just jiggling around in pockets and lunch bags. At that moment, Greg's view of school had completely changed, and forever. School had suddenly become the most interesting place on the planet because young Greg Keaton had decided that school would be an excellent place to make his fortune.